Good evening and good to have you with us in this edition of the Urban Debate. Viewers, we are living in unprecedented times. A statement made many times this year already as India deals with multiple issues from an economic slowdown to a pandemic. Add to that what has happened late last evening and last night in Ladakh at the India-China border. Viewers, unfortunately, we have lost one army officer, two more army soldiers in a violent clash that unfolded between the Indian and Chinese soldiers. As part of the de-escalation process, the Chinese team that was present in this area of Galwan Valley was supposed to withdraw. Yes, as you know, there has been a massive face-off standoff between the two sides building in the last 1.5 months. But in the last few days, we had been seeing some progress reportedly being made for de-escalation that the two countries had agreed upon. But China has one more time betrayed us and let us down. Instead of withdrawing their soldiers from this particular location, they have in fact turned around and attacked our side. And the commanding officer who was present there from the Indian side to oversee this de-escalation process was the one who was targeted. Suffice to say that led to an ugly clash with a large number of soldiers on both sides. And we have casualties on our side that have been confirmed so far, 3 casualties, 3 soldiers martyred. We also know that even on the Chinese side, there have been few casualties. At least 4 have been confirmed, but there are various other reports that are doing the rounds. What is also unfortunate is the way it happened, in the most brutal manner, with stones and sticks or clubs. That is how the Chinese attacked us. And that is how our soldiers were beaten to death. As we speak, efforts are on yet again to defuse the situation. As we speak, the topmost army generals are in conversation. The Chief of Defence Staff, the Army Chief, our various arms of forces, Defence Minister, constant briefings to the Prime Minister, all of that is going on, viewers. And we are waiting for a detailed statement from our government. The initial statement from the army only confirmed that yes, there was a clash, yet yes, 3 of ours have been martyred and there have been casualties on both sides. That is it. We now await more information. But this is unprecedented, the way I started. And I don't want to sit here and speculate. I don't want to sit here and resort to chest thumping or war mongering. That's not us. That is not Meera Now. We are going to arm you with facts. We are going to tell you all the angles, demystify, decode all the angles, get deep into this topic and understand how we reached here, what happened, and what can now happen. There will be 10 questions that our experts and the best of the experts when it comes to defense will answer for us over the next 90 minutes. I want to quickly take you through these 10 questions that we have, and stay with me because you will want to know these details. First up, of course, what happened at the Galwan Valley of Ladakh. Some of the details I just shared with you. Then, what is the background to the Galwan Valley clash? Question number 3. What is the India-China Ladakh standoff really about? Why do we have this issue with China? Question number 4. What were the India-Chinese teams doing to de-escalate tension? How did we reach this point so far? What were the attempts that were made? Then, of course, all of this, the core of the problem here is the line of the actual control. What is that? How different is it from an international border or the LOC that we share with Pakistan? Why was India increasing its army presence at the LAC in the last few weeks? Have the Chinese occupied any part of our territory? There are numerous reports that are doing the rounds. Do the Chinese regularly stall our projects? Is that why it is happening this time again? And then we go to the projects and speak about the road and the bridge that has become the point of contention here. Without wasting any further time, let me quickly go across to our panelists who are joining us right now. Maruf Raza, Strategic Affairs expert and a consulting editor to the Times Network. Meera Shankar, former Indian ambassador to US and Germany and an expert voice when it comes to these issues. And I also have General Shankar Roy Chowdhury, former army chief of our country, also with us this evening. But very quickly, Maruf, from what we have learned so far, how this happened. It's shocking that when we were expecting the Chinese troops to withdraw, they in turn seem to have turned around and attacked our team and outnumbered us to a certain extent.
Well, Tanvi, at the start, let me thank you for giving me the honor to speak first. I wasn't expecting to do that because both General Shankar Roy Chowdhury and Ambassador Meera Shankar are people I have known and I respect them greatly, and they're much more senior and more experienced than I am. But let me give you the facts. The first thing is that, the Chinese began encroachments in the month of May, between 5th and 9th of May. A certain amount of encroachments took place in the areas of particularly the LAC. The LAC is largely a line that is agreed in principle, but it is not demarcated fully point by point on the map like the line of control is demarcated. And that was one of the issues that went in our favor when General Musharraf got his troops to encroach upon Indian territory in Kargil, because they crossed a demarcated boundary. Here it is delineated, but subject to formal agreement by both sides, and that hasn't happened for at least the last 25 years. Ever since in 1993, Mr. Deng Xiaoping, following a visit by Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, agreed that yes, there could be a way forward in this, and in principle the term line of actual control was adopted. Then by 1996 it got firmed up a little more in diplomatic parlance. But we've had 22 or more formal high-level meetings with the Chinese, and we've got nowhere even to get the Chinese to accept the maps that we produce of this area. The problem is the Sino-Indian border is divided into three areas. One is the so-called western sector, where this major altercation has now taken place, that runs from what is the northernmost tip of the erstwhile state of Jammu Kashmir, now parts of Ladakh, and runs through that, cutting through Ladakh and coming close to somewhere close to the Nepal border, where the central sector starts. And the central sector thereafter goes beyond Nepal. You go on to what is the eastern part of Nepal, Sikkim is, and after that starts the McMahon line. Now, the McMahon line is the only line that was demarcated, and Pandit Nehru, in his various assertions, repeatedly asserted that McMahon line he recognized as a boundary earlier with Tibet, occupied Tibet in 51, 53 in that time space. Then India more or less recognized Tibet as a part of China by 54, the Panchsheel Agreement. So there is a problem largely about this area, which is in Ladakh, where there is no clear demarcation as to what is really yours. Quite literally, I mean, General Roy Chowdhury will explain to us, I'm sure, much better, having been Army Chief. But in those areas, what you hold on to and what you can grab is what has been China's policy of holding on to those areas and making greater encroachments. Some people call it the salami slice strategy. But the most important thing is that, as far as I'm concerned, that the Chinese are looking beyond border skirmishes. They're looking at the strategic aim of going northwards of Ladakh and using up whatever force and other pressure they can to extract as much land from us, so that they can link up with the Karakoram Pass and then on to the Galwan Valley, which Pakistan gave to them in March 1963. Now, the final point I wish to make is that we on the ground, on both sides, have avoided any shootouts, with the exception of 1967, when a major fight took place between Indian and Chinese troops near Sikkim, a place called Lathula. And that is when China got quite a bloody nose and several hundred soldiers died collectively on both sides and were injured. Thereafter, there has been no serious physical skirmish leading to use of weapons. And therefore, this time, what the Chinese had done, they went beyond pushing and jostling. They came with iron rods with nails fitted in them, and they were rather severe in their engagement. It is not that, and this is the point I want to clarify, that it's not just Indian soldiers who have died last night. Apparently, by admission of one Chinese spokesperson earlier in the day, they have also lost some men. So our troops, who are today much better prepared, much motivated, and are not going to go down without a fight. What happened in 1962 was a national disaster because of our politicians wanting to macro-manage the battle. And I hope Mr. Modi, as has been his style, will not macro-manage this. He leave it to the military. The military knows what to do. But it is for the politicians and the diplomats to sort out the problem at a larger
Maruf, you may want to hear this as well. And so I'm sorry I'm interrupting you. But this is the statement that has come out, and I want to read that out, word by word for our panelists, for our viewers to hear what the Ministry of External Affairs has told us. Now, this is actually the response that has come from the government right now because they were flooded with media queries, obviously, since this news came out. And this is what the government statement says right now. India and China have been discussing through military and diplomatic channels the de-escalation of the situation in the border area in eastern Ladakh. Senior commanders had a productive meeting on June 6, 2020, and we had agreed on a process for such de-escalation. Subsequently, ground commanders had a series of meetings to implement the consensus reached at a higher level. While it was our expectation that this would unfold smoothly, the Chinese side departed from the consensus to respect the line of actual control in the Galwan Valley. On the late evening and night of 15th June, a violent face-off happened as a result, and this is the important part, as a result of an attempt by the Chinese side to unilaterally change the status quo here. Both sides suffered casualties that could have been avoided had the agreement been followed by the Chinese scrupulously at a higher level. Now, given its responsible approach, the government statement says, given its responsible approach to border management, India is very clear that all its activities are strictly within the Indian side of the line of actual control, and we expect the same from the Chinese. We remain firmly convinced of the need for the maintenance of peace and the tranquility in the border areas and the resolution of differences through dialogue. At the same time, we are also strongly committed to ensuring India's sovereignty and territorial integrity. This is the statement that has just been issued by the government. Let me also say good evening to Lieutenant General P.J.S. Pannu. He has great amount of experience when it comes to this entire region. He was a former corps commander of this region itself. But before I come to you, General Pannu, let me quickly get into a response from Meera Shankar on this statement that has just come out. Meera Shankar, how do you view what the MEA is saying right now?
Well, I think, the MEA is taking cognizance of the situation. It's recognizing that clashes have occurred and that there has been loss of life, an officer and 2 soldiers on the Indian side, and losses on the Chinese side as well, of which we don't really know the details. The actual details of the incident are not very clear, but obviously, it's contrary to what was being projected by both sides as a constructive effort at disengagement. Though, mark you, the disengagement was to be progressive, starting from one sector, and nothing had been done in the 3 other sectors where incursions and intrusions had also taken place. In Pangong So, where the Chinese had dug in Hot Springs, and in Nakula, Sikkim, I think no talks have been held as yet on the eastern sector. But the general impression conveyed by the Indian side was the talks had been constructive. There was a disengagement process which was due to start, and it would take place in a phased manner. And over a period of time, we hope that China would vacate all the intrusions and establish status quo ante. Now, clearly, the Chinese have no intention of establishing status quo ante all along the areas where they have intruded. And we see that in this incident also, which has taken place, where according to our side, the Chinese came back and attacked our side, not proceeding according to the disengagement protocols and processes which had been worked out. For India, I think we don't want to escalate the situation. We are open for talks and to continue the process of disengagement through discussions and negotiations, both at the level of military, of the army, high-level military commanders, field officers, as well as at the level of diplomats. I think Foreign Minister Shankar is likely to also talk to his counterpart, because he will be meeting, with them virtually for the Russia-India-China meeting.
Correct.
So that's an opportunity to raise it. But at the same time, I think India wants to signal, one minute, I think at the same time, India wants to signal that we are not, just because we are adopting a posture of seeking disengagement and de-escalation, doesn't mean that we will not hold our ground. And the army has been given authority to take whatever action it deems necessary at the local level to show our strength. We are not looking to engage in combat, but we certainly are also not looking to vacate, and we have every intention of holding firm.
Okay, every intention of holding firm to the point where we are right now, but at this point we also know that there have been 3 brave hearts lost, 3 lives lost. General Chowdhury, good evening to you. Thank you so much for being with us this evening. Now, General Chowdhury, the questions that we are seeking answers to, 10 questions that we will address over the next 90 minutes. One of the biggest questions there is this Galwan Valley and the importance of it, and historically what has been seen here. The large general understanding was that this has largely been a peaceful area since 1962. It's not really the place where you see the skirmishes along the LAC, but that seems to have changed this time. What is your view? General Chowdhury, good evening. Can you hear me?
Just about. I can just about hear you. Sound is not good.
Yes. General Chowdhury, my question to you was about this specific area, the Galwan Valley, where the clash has now unfolded. Since the war, the general understanding is that it has been largely peaceful until now. Could you shed some more light on that?
The Galwan Valley has never come up in any of the disputed points so far. The Galwan Valley has never come up in the disputed points so far. It has generally been further east with China. As a matter of fact, the entire Chinese Sino-Indian border after 1962 has been a bit of a forgotten frontier. There have been no incidents, nothing at all. It was all quiet. The name of Galwan Valley has come up, but that was much earlier, maybe around 1961, even earlier than 1962. After that, the Galwan Valley and the other portions of the Sino-Indian border were totally peaceful. Not a shot was fired. I think someone mentioned it, not a bullet was fired. Until today, when it suddenly flared up again. The reasons, there are many, and we can examine the things each according to our own perception. But what I would like to say that whatever conclusions we arrive at are going to be mere guesswork, because the Chinese have a habit, have a tendency of acting irrationally. Irrationally. It happened like that in 1962. It's happening again. So it's best, I think, to prepare yourselves and watch what happens.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. Like you said rightly, that Galwan Valley has not really been a point of contention all of this time. But the fact that we've now started on our side of the territory, started building a road and a bridge, that seems to have upset the Chinese, and that's what seems to have led to this entire point. That's what many experts are also saying. General Pannu, good evening to you. Again, on this specific part itself, General Pannu, the fact that we've not seen such kind of a clash really happen in this area, but it has now in such an ugly manner. Perhaps would this be the worst kind that we've seen actually since the war?
Yeah, good evening. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity of coming on your show. I've been watching these events very keenly because I have actually walked most of the ridge lines or flown over them, and I have dealt with situations being the hands-on co-commander about 2.5 years back. As far as the Chinese are concerned, I think Chinese may look irrational, but there is a rationality in their own minds when they undertake an irrational act. It is well coordinated, well thought of. They know what they are doing, and they know what they are achieving. After all, if they were to settle a boundary issue, they would have settled it long time back. And since they have not settled, obviously there are certain intentions that clearly speak of their actions. I would like to mention that while, of course, everybody speaks about the line of actual control and different perceptions, their perception, our perception, and certain areas seem to be agreed, disputed areas. And these agreed, disputed areas are the ones which are obviously, they become bone of contention. But according to how we peacefully talk to each other about these disputed areas, is that okay? We will, handle these over discussions, across the table. However, what happens is that on ground, the situation, the way it develops, is a very well thought out action by the Chinese, because they do not want any line to be settled and perceived to be settled. Even whether it is a line of actual control, which is our perceived line of actual control, or their perceived line of actual control, they don't want anybody to understand it in either of the ways. They want this area to remain disturbed. So wherever you draw a line, and that is a line that they want to alter the status quo every time, and this has been an experience for very, very long. We have in that area two places where we have, border meetings with them. One is near Galwan, we have the DBO area. We have a hut where we sit and talk and do all our border exchanges, ceremonial as well as border talks. And south of Pegongso, we have Chushul Moldo area, where our commanders, brigadiers and sometimes major generals are as mutually decide, they sit together and talk about things. Sometimes, and I would say, you realize that the Chinese officers are speaking a language, but they on ground want to do something literally differently. To prove a point that it is not on the table that you can speak everything, because their actions are also a language. When the patrols come, they are accompanied by officers, and there is a face-off whenever we realize, and we have our own areas from where we watch them, and we also go to those areas, which is typically called a face-off. There are laid out drills according to agreements that the moment there is a face-off, both sides stand at a distance, and they are supposed to pull out banners and to say that, look, you are crossing a line and go back. And the troops versus troops, they come into one straight line, and the officers then walk up and talk about it, what the matter is. Most of the time, the matter gets resolved, but pushing and shoving sometimes does happen, because they want to speak a language of strength on the line of actual control. Most of the troops are obviously completely restrained in their directions from both sides, that they will not fire a shot. They are armed with arms and ammunition. They have everything with them. But usually they speak, the officers sort it out, and they go back. I have seen during my tenure there that the troops, as far as the PLA is concerned, are pre-programmed, that while the officers are talking, you find that in a very tactical manner, the officer actually retreats from their side, and certain instructions according to pre-program is that you go and start either hitting stones or doing something, and then they actually orchestrate a struggle between the troops, and then the natural outcome is that jostling happens, and physically, sometimes there are injuries which have happened in the past. During my time, even in the Pegong zone near Finger 4, we had a skirmish where the Chinese started pelting stones at our troops. Our stone pelting also ensued because there is you can't retaliate with live firing according to the agreement. As a result, there is communication which happens through talk and through action. And these are the two things, when they coordinate, you find that there is a general outcome of anger, there is a general outcome of confusion, and sometimes our troops also get hurt, their troops also get hurt, and this has happened in the past. I think this time they have come into an area which is traditionally not where they have been coming. I'm not very sure whether you are getting me or not. Maybe there's a break in communication. I'm not getting any feedback.
No, I was listening to you, and your voice was loud and clear. And thank you for really explaining that in detail, how it handles, because, for a layman to really wonder what the dispute really is at the line of actual control, and how the soldiers on ground really manage it. If there are transgressions, which with the Chinese happens quite often, not just in Ladakh, in other areas as well, it is very interesting to hear what you had to just say. I just want to quickly take our viewers through what has really happened since May 5th. Now, a lot of it in the middle of a pandemic and a lockdown didn't get the attention, but there were many media houses who were constantly tracking what was happening in Ladakh. To this point, viewers, it actually started on May 5th. That's when the first round of a serious scuffle took place between the two sides at Pegangso, which is this giant lake which is shared between the two countries. Both sides then began to move in additional troops. Next thing we saw, and this was reported by some of the media organizations, on May 6th, that the Chinese troops closed in on the Finger 2 of Pegangso. Then on May 12th, there were reports of Chinese helicopters, flying around way too close to this zone, way too close along the line of control. In response, even our own fighter jets were actually used to carry out sorties, of course, on our side of the territory. The Army Chief himself visited the Leh base on May 23rd. So things had actually become extremely tense by then. The Army Chief himself visited. On May 26th, the Chief of Defence Staff actually held a briefing and briefed Prime Minister Modi on the situation. Efforts by then had begun to try and diffuse the situation. By June 1st, Beijing came out with a statement saying situation along China-India border is now stable. Then the conversations began. On June 2nd, Major General rank officers held deliberations. On June 5th, it was at the Joint Secretary level of the Foreign Joint Secretary who handles the East Zone for us, and his counterpart in China. They held conversations, and around June 9, June 10th is when actually on ground the de-escalation process began, as you also saw from the MEA statement. Unfortunately, on June 15th, this has taken place. Now, a lot of efforts, Maruf, taken to kind of diffuse the situation. But with China, it's just so unpredictable. Nowhere else will you hear two countries agree to de-escalate and then end up in such a violent clash, Maruf?
Yes, in fact, Ambassador Meera Shankar did mention that between what they say and what they do on the ground, it's not exactly follows a predictable pattern. General Pannu, who's an old friend, has again very nicely articulated and spelled out the whole situation as it exists. And he knows the area better than any of us do, having been Corps Commander there in 14 Corps. But equally important is to understand that, this area, Galwan Valley, has always been with us, even during the fiercest of fighting in the initial stages of the 62 conflict. Certain units of the Indian Army and the militias, 14 Jack militia, 5 Jat, 1-8 Gurkhas, put up hell of a fight out there. And this has never been with China. China has always eyed that territory. And they, as I explained to you earlier, they're working on to a long-term strategic plan. All this niceties about, we will de-escalate. In fact, with China, I wish to follow exactly what an American president said decades ago. Trust but verify. And unless you verify it on the ground, don't accept anything they tell you. The other aspect to understand is that this particular standoff that's happened, as Ambassador Meera Shankar brought out, has happened at about 4 points along the LOC and 1 near Sikkim. China is doing 2 or 3 other things. It is wanting to create a certain degree of tension between India and China because it is concerned about India's increasing ties with the United States, which China has always been threatened about. Ambassador Meera Shankar was our ambassador in the US and will confirm this to me. And also the fact that it was initially the US footprint in India that led to Mao Zedong deciding, amongst other reasons, to teach Nehru a lesson with 62 during the conflict. But also now the Chinese feel that this is the time to put India under pressure. They always operate under the umbrella of another international crisis. The 62 conflict took place in the same dates when America was trying to get the Soviets to pull off the missiles from Cuba, leading to the missile crisis. You can check the dates. Same time as the 62 conflict. And now again, when the world's attention is divided with the COVID and the mess that the Chinese have to make to a great extent created, and I believe it is an orchestrated biological attack on the world, and it is not just any wet market exercise. So the Chinese are using this to both assuage their population, deflect attention of Delhi from the main crisis that is at home of COVID, and also to tell their sympathizers and supporters that a muscular China is very much there and it hasn't been rattled by the fallout of the COVID. So we should not also, go apologetic and say that, oh, by the way, let us deal with COVID first, then we'll deal with you later. You have to operate at multi-pronged levels. That is what the challenge of trying to be a big power is. And China, finally, and most importantly, is also working, to my mind, to a long-term strategy in trying to couple up with Pakistan and put pressure on us, both in Ladakh and Kashmir, because Pakistan is part of their grand strategy of getting access to river waters and everything that lies between Karakoram Pass, what we call POK, and the Indus Plains thereafter. They want that water. They want Pakistan's support to put dual pressure on India. Historically, they've used Pakistan as a distraction for India. So, all this stuff that we keep talking about, that we have huge trade links. Please remember, China has massive trade links with Taiwan. But it is also repeatedly asserting that the unfinished business for the Republic of China is to get hold of Taiwan and make it part of its sort of one nation, one state agenda, which is what their apologists every other day give you that assertion through their newspapers and mouthpieces. So China is working on that. And China's final area
Correct.
of concern is India's growing naval presence in the Indian Ocean along with the US, which is now called Indo-Pacific Theater. And China feels very, very nervous about India's footprint in the high seas. So all those factors are involved. This could be contained, but this could, if not properly managed, could escalate to unmanageable levels.
Yes, in fact, let me also go back to Meera Shankar on this. Meera Shankar, would you want to weigh in as to what is pushing China to do this? Of course, it's not just a dispute in Ladakh. It's about the confrontations and the whole discussion about the South China Sea, the territorial waters. It's also about how China is getting cornered when it comes to the global COVID conversation and holding China responsible for that. It's a series of issues. It could also be, to my mind, a few of the policy decisions that we've made, including putting the Chinese companies, on a specific FDI list. So it could be a whole host of issues. Is that why we're seeing China respond in such a manner?
Well, I would say there are a number of reasons which could have propelled China's behavior, and to a large extent, I agree with what Maroof has said. It's not just local issues, because the way in which they've come in very deliberately across 4 sectors, not just one area, from the west to the east, including sectors where they have not come before, like the Galwan Valley, shows that it's a pretty deliberate plan. And it's of a piece with what China has been doing vis-a-vis Taiwan, vis-a-vis Hong Kong. It has attached the South China Sea and its islands and installations there as districts internal to China. This is something they've done recently. They've had clashes small with Vietnam, with Malaysia, with Philippines in this area, where their boats have buzzed some of the boats from the other side or installations from the other side. So if we look at the pattern of Chinese behavior right now, it would appear that China is signaling that, it really sees that perhaps there's an opportunity to replace the US as the dominant power in Asia. And they see that the US is preoccupied with the COVID crisis, which continues right now there, with the race riots and other issues, and with an impending presidential election. So their attention is diverted, and therefore this is a good time as any to exert or to, display your power within the neighborhood. With India, China has tended to use the border issue as strategic leverage, playing it up when they want to, creating a problem, and then, easing down when they want to. To slightly differ with what some of the other panelists have said, there was actually also an armed clash in 1975. After 67 in Sikkim, there was one where our patrol was ambushed in Arunachal Pradesh by the Chinese. And then subsequently, there was an intrusion in the late 80s in Guangdong, where they had created more or less permanent facilities. Now, if we look back at what happened during the Guangdong intrusion, where India suddenly found our patrols went there, that there were kind of permanent facilities which the Chinese had created, we responded by outmaneuvering the Chinese and occupying the ridge on top, the heights of the Hatungla Ridge. So we actually then, gained an advantageous military spot where we dug in, and eventually the issue was sorted out. But you see also that China uses these tactics to nibble away at Indian territory, because it's kind of 2 steps forward and 1 step back. So when they take 2 steps forward and then eventually agree to take 1 step back, they're still holding on to that 1 step which they had
Right.
occupied in the beginning, and everybody saying, oh, it's all been handled very peacefully and now the situation is much better. I mean, the last recent standoff was Doklam, where they agreed to pull back after we talked to them and we explained what
Correct.
our concerns were, where they were building that road right up to a point where they could threaten the Chicken's Neck or the Siliguri corridor. But then after that, they have built infrastructure across that area and strengthened their troop presence. So while they have pulled back from the specific area, in the broader region, they have built infrastructure and strengthened their presence. So I think that the Chinese really use
And that's the
border
different,
as a strategic issue, to keep
Yes.
India settled, because at some level, you can see that China's policy is to slow India's rise. They do not want any
Yes.
country to be an equal competitor. We are, of course, far from being an equal competitor right now. But if you look at a country which has the potential in the long run to be a contestant with China, it's India. So they see it as being very much in their interest to
And
slow
also, Meera Shankar, to the point that you made earlier, look at the way China continues to build whatever it wants on its side, sometimes getting dangerously close to the line of actual control or to the border. But the minute the Indian side builds a road for our own convenience, for our travel, for our connectivity, or a bridge, or even bunkers for that matter for our troops, China makes a big deal out of it, and then we end up with one of these skirmishes. Now, if I can just go back to the soldiers on this panel and talk a little bit more about the line of actual control. Now, viewers, the line of actual control, very different in some ways, but very similar in other to the LOC that we more often than not refer to, because Pakistan is usually more in headlines and in focus as far as India is concerned. But this is actually the loosely demarcated line. The LSC is the loosely demarcated line between the Indian and Chinese territories. And it came into being after the 1962 war, where a part of our land then became Chinese territory as well. Now, because largely, General Chowdhury, there is no clear-cut demarcation, we do end up seeing a lot more skirmishes, standoffs, transgressions, whichever term we want to use it, with the Chinese along this zone. And in Ladakh, it becomes even more difficult because the place itself is so dangerous. The weather conditions are so extreme. And on top of that, we have an enemy who keeps poking at us.
Not quite that. I think we should look at it in a larger historical perspective of China. China has a historical policy, a historical tradition, historical policy, and that goes back to the ancient times, all under heaven. All under heaven is that of the emperor. China has always historically considered itself, even when it was in dire straits, defeated by Japan, that Chinese holding on to their tradition of all under heaven is the emperor's. The emperor is the emperor of China, and all under heaven belongs to him. Mao Zedong considered himself to be a Chinese emperor, though he was though he was the communist, but he considered himself to be in the Chinese tradition of the Chinese emperor, all under heaven. So when China comes into India and runs up against, when China comes into Asia and runs up against a rival which can rival it like India, it takes various options. For example, its treaty with Pakistan is a master stroke. Master stroke, which I think it has caused us a lot of trouble. Their agreements with Pakistan have caused us lots of trouble. And also the theater which will of the prime importance to China is not the land border in Asia. It is the South China Sea, connecting China with its sources of oil in Africa, where it is also expanding. It is expanding tremendously into Africa. So that is the strategic frontier, all under heaven. And I think Mr. Xi Jinping conceives himself in the line of the Chinese emperors before him, and he also wishes to follow in their footsteps. Therefore, he is expanding. He is asserting his destiny, if you like, his country's destiny in Asia, that is in Ladakh, in the rest of Asia along the land border, but the place where he is exerting the most is in the Indian Ocean, as also in the so-called vacant territories of Africa. So that is where China is exerting its fullest strength to seize its destiny. So that is where we are going, and we must understand that we have also got to meet China on equal footing, not only along the Himalayas, not only along the land borders, but also in the Indian Ocean, which is the larger frontier for us. So all these things have to be kept in mind when we are talking about China, China's competition with India, and we will have to compete with them on all counts, including economically. That's one area where we have just failed to compete with them, because Chinese goods are outselling us on the market, and the buyers are our own Indians. So we have got to pull ourselves up, get our economics right, so that we can really compete with China on an equal footing. As long as we are economically subservient to them, we will always be number two.
Okay, I take the point that you're making, that perhaps, in other tools that will have to be used to confront China and tackle China, obviously economics and the trade comes into play. But if I can just come back one more time to militarily speaking, what's happening right now and what's happened in the past. General Pannu, if you can shed some more light on how does it work on ground, and you referred to some of it in your first answer, because the line of actual control isn't really that clear. Is there a certain amount of buffer zone, distance that is maintained by the two sides? How is it that we see these transgressions where the Chinese, repeatedly come so close or sometimes enter our side? What is usually the system as far as Ladakh itself is concerned?
When you stand at our own side of the LAC as we understand, you look across, you see some Chinese posts and you see some towers, some radars, radomes, that's all you see. Normally you don't see Chinese moving around. They haven't built any defenses, but they just live there. However, what happens on ground is that they don't want to recognize a ground on a given day. They pick up the vehicles or the patrols, and they either are predictable, which most of the time they are. They take a particular route, which we also take at some point, and which is predictable, and then there is a regular face-off, as I was explaining. But what happens in situations where they actually want to surprise us is that they come in large numbers and they go into areas where they have not gone earlier, creating a new situation. And that is exactly what has happened this time, that they have gone into new areas. When they come to new areas, sometimes the face-off is prolonged, and sometimes the face-off takes much more longer time. It depends on how logistically they have planned themselves. This time, obviously, they have planned themselves logistically in a manner and have also gone into an area which is really in a very sensitive zone of Galwan Valley. The Galwan Valley actually leads to the DSDBO road, which is the main artery or the lifeline built over a couple of years to join DBO. And north of DBO is the Karakoram Pass. In fact, a lot of people get mistaken Karakoram Highway from Karakoram Pass. The Karakoram Highway obviously is where the road has been built, that is the OBOR road through Pakistan and Gilgit-Baltistan, that is the Karakoram Highway. But north of the DBO is the Karakoram Pass, and they come up to the Karakoram Pass and they go back. And we also do the same thing. That is where closest the international border is, as we understand international border. Whether they want to understand in the international borders parlance or not, well, is another matter. They don't want to. As far as Karakoram Pass is concerned, if you start drawing lines, when I say lines, obviously it means our perception, their perception, and the disputed areas. You draw a line towards south east, or more south-southeast, and you find a number of places where they come. Galwan Nala really comes to a point south of DBO and comes very close to the DSDBO, which is our strategic lifeline. That is what is not acceptable. They have come into this area. They don't have any claim there. They don't have any historical case where they have either claimed that area or they have come into that area. But this is an area which is like, getting to your neck. And coming and sitting at your neck obviously means that there will be much more force applied than is traditionally done by the Indian forces.
Right.
I always have my own understanding that there are two behaviors of Chinese. One is on the patrolling area where the officers come up. And secondly is in these areas where we have the flag meetings. I always felt that a smiling Chinese is a dangerous man because he's come with a plan. And the angry Chinese is the one where he is now scared because his plan is now not how he planned it. It's not unfolding that way. And when the Chinese become angry, obviously it is not conforming to the plan. And they hit out in a manner that they have got very strict orders from behind. And those orders are not being delivered by the officers on ground, and they get very violent. Obviously, they have come into this area with an agenda to get into interception or come very close to a comfort of the DSDBO line. And that is where the Indian troops will never allow them to come in. And a jostling of the nature which is happening now, obviously, has resulted in a casualty which is being spoken about. Normally, this kind of a casualty does not happen. It's minor, injuries, which obviously two people either stone pelting or jostling, pushing, and shoving. But this time has been a little more serious. There are no reports per se of really shooting, but if you come armed with rods and with pipes, obviously your intention is that you are not going to go and fire, but you are definitely going to cause injury. And that is precisely what seems to have happened here. This order or an agreement of going back obviously is by their tactics that, okay, as far as the agreement is concerned, let's agree to go back. But on ground, I think that is not the order which the troops have got. And our Indian forces are trying to implement the agreement which has happened across the table. And when the Indian troops really go in all the sincerity to implement what is happening on the negotiating table, the Chinese do not get the same orders. And that is where a Chinese soldier gets angry. He's got a very, very strong agenda that he has to deliver on ground. When he can't deliver, obviously, somebody who's armed with pipes and rods would use it. And I think that is precisely the case.
Yes, your pipes and rods and stones, because that is what was used by the Chinese to attack the commanding officer who was there to oversee the de-escalation process. And then that turned into a violent clash. Unfortunately, 3 brave hearts, 3 lives lost of the Indian army, some casualties on the Chinese side as well. It's been a pleasure to have all of you on this panel, shedding so much light and sharing your insights into what's really going on. Viewers, like I promised you, 10 questions, 10 angles in 90 minutes. We've covered 5 of them. 5 more are left. That conversation will continue on the other side. So stay with me.